I love The Road Warrior, or as non-US audiences would call it, appropriately so, Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior. You know, it's interesting. 80s pop culture has so much going for it right now. You have shows like Stranger Things that are firmly in the zeitgeist. It just seems like the 80s are more relevant now than it's ever been. You know, the 80s also provided some of the last seemingly original intellectual properties, although you talk to a lot of creators today and they say the 80s aren't that original or that much of a risk taker, but I think the Road Warrior is. And while everything builds on itself, so, you know, for example, like Star Wars isn't that original. We have George Lucas basically wanting to make Flash Gordon. He couldn't get the rights to it, so he made Star Wars, and thank God for that. You know, you have a film like The Road Warrior coming out in May of 82 in the United States, came out in 81 elsewhere, but it's special, it's unique, and the villains really jump out at me just as a fan of film. They are memorable. And it almost seems like today we're dealing with like everything just being constantly recycled. While that can be saddening, I think it is worthwhile. And it's kind of what Living in the Past is trying to do, is just revisiting pop culture that we love from the 80s. And maybe it's like, why is it so influential? Or why does it have the staying power? Why is it getting recycled? And I think you can look at the Road Warrior as almost like a map for why that might be. George Miller, the director, just created something really special. He brought this, along with the costume designers and set designers and just all the people that collaboratively worked on this film, they brought this design aesthetic that I think has had this lasting impact. Just recently, there was an event out in the western part of the United States. It was basically a Road Warrior Mad Max festival where people dressed up like or similar to the characters of the Road Warrior in those films that are in the Mad Max series. And, you know, it's amazing that I think if you don't have the Road Warrior, I don't know if you have the series. I don't think you get Thunderdome. I don't think you get Fury Road. And obviously they're making a prequel now about Furiosa. I don't think you get that without the Road Warrior. It's sort of like, I don't think Star Wars really keeps going if you don't have The Empire Strikes Back. Obviously they'll make Return of the Jedi, but if Empire wasn't a success, I don't know if it would be what it is today. And I think the Road Warrior sort of fits that same place in the series of films. But look at the villains of the film. In a way, there's like 3 key villains, really 2, but then you have this kind of minor one. And you have the Humongous, which is the hockey-wearing mask leader of the Marauders who are attacking the settlers in the film. You have Wes, Humongous's second in command, and who's memorable. I mean, he rides his little motorcycle, has his little red-tinged mohawk, and then there's the third, and he doesn't really fit. I mean, he isn't as cool as the other 2, but he might be just as interesting in some ways, and that's the Toady, or the crier, the town crier, who would announce Humongous and his Marauders. It's interesting, George Miller, in an old issue of Fantastic Films, it's like issue 30, came out in August of 82. He was asked a question. Basically, the question was, Humongous is wearing this mask and he has this bodybuilder's physique. Why did you keep his face covered is the question. And is he a villain that's left over from Mad Max? And Miller said something really interesting. He said, we have these extensive background on all these characters. When you're and this is the quote, he goes, normally when you're writing a screenplay, you try and condense a number of characters into one for the sake of plot simplification. He goes, in this case, we did the opposite. We split the arch villain into 3 characters. We had Humongous the body. We had the guy with the Davy Crockett hat who loses his fingers as the mouthpiece, and guy with the mohawk as the crazed maniac. And, you know, take a moment and just think about Humongous for a second. If he's buff, he has a hockey mask. He has the cool gun with the scope, right? But did you notice that when he opens up like the case, there's like a picture of his parents or grandparents, so sentimental, right? In the background, just in the research I did, it basically said that he was before Armageddon or before the apocalypse or whatever, he was a military strategist and philosopher, and he gets burned in some accident. Is Mad Max involved in that? Who knows? There's nothing ever explicitly said, but it's interesting to think that maybe Max had something to do with it. You know, he has cool spears and he has nitrous oxide. What's not to love? But there's this design aesthetic. He's mysterious. He's muscular. He's intelligent. He's quoting, I think, Germanic writers and poets, the Marauders are whipping themselves into the frenzy up on the ridge, waiting for the people in the fuel depot to do something. So you got Humongous. Then you have Wes, who He has the mohawk. He has the assless chaps, which apparently Mel Gibson would basically say, "Hey, we know it's getting cold when his butt cheeks turn purple, and we need to go inside." Apparently, when they were filming it, it was winter. Obviously, as a viewer, we're like, the desert, it's hot, but it got quite cold there where they were filming. Times you will see on the set photos behind the scenes where they're just like covered in blankets or big jackets. Wes is cool. Like, he has the motorcycle. He has the I don't know if this is cool, but he has the Golden Youth, who's his partner. It's funny. The actor that played Wes said the Golden Youth was more like he was a surrogate father to him, but I don't know about that. It's interesting just to see these characters, and even the town crier, the Toady, I guess is his name. It's just interesting to watch not only how they interact, but just how they are designed, the outfits they wear. There's mystery behind all of them. We're never given what the whole story is. We're just kind of dropped in the middle of the Road Warrior. I don't know. I feel like a lot of the things we watch today, even back then, I think this is why the Road Warrior is special. There's always a need to explain everything. And I think sometimes when you leave a little bit of mystery in there, it fuels our own imagination as the viewer. It almost makes us not necessarily infatuated, but we're very interested in what we're seeing up on the screen. And I don't know if there are better villains than what we see in the Road Warrior from the 1980s. In fact, like, Wes makes an appearance in Weird Science. It's really interesting to see just how influential this was. Of course, we see big conventions of people dressing up like Road Warrior characters or Mad Max characters. And of course, Fury Road happens, which might be one of the best action films of the century. It's just amazing to think about it. And if you haven't watched The Road Warrior recently, it's worth going back and revisiting just for the design of these characters and how they're handled within the film. George Miller is a gifted storyteller, gifted filmmaker, and he's done something special with The Road Warrior, specifically with the characters. And these villains are unique and memorable and mysterious, and they're totally worth your time to revisit.